You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Johanna from Austria, and guess what? We're both here.
Hey! Yeah, I'm Annie in Massachusetts, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast.
Yes, thanks for sticking with us over the last few weeks. It was exhausting and it was weird, but I can tell you one thing. I'm so glad to be recording with Annie again because it's so much more fun.
Yeah.
Even though we're talking about true crime, and so much more fruitful. Because,
I agree.
It's two brains working, not just half mine. How are you, Annie?
I'm all right. I missed you. Yeah, I much prefer doing this with you, and I am feeling a lot better than I was last week. Yeah, what are the odds that we're both down at the same time? Well,
Yeah.
It happens. But we really appreciate all the very, very lovely messages from everybody. We can't thank you enough. And as always, we want to send a special shout out to our newest Patreon members, Joe Taylor. Hi, Joe. Pinar T. Thank you very much. And San. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for your support. I have one last thing I want to mention before we start. A huge thank you to Cherise and her two beautiful cats, Lilith and Azael. And also to Christy and her squirrel Skippy. Because guess what? 3 weeks ago, your holiday cards finally reached us. Isn't this crazy? It took almost 5 months for them to get to us. So thank you so much for thinking of us. It means so much to us. And I hope you didn't think we just ignored them or we didn't care. Because they really just got here when I was sick. So
yeah.
Yes.
Sometimes things take a really long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially these holidays were crazy. One other thing, my voice is still a little bit, if you can hear, but Anne is going to do most of the talking today anyway.
Yeah,
so.
My voice is also a little bit, but, we're going to do our best. All right. So, let us get into today's episode. I'm going to be touching on unreported sexual assault. There is some brief mention of suicide and also dismemberment in this one. Nothing too in-depth, but these are parts of this story. Today we're going back to 1936, and this is a really interesting time period research-wise. I don't know if you feel the same way, Johanna, but there's a lot of mention of the war. Or the Great War. Of course, they didn't know that there'd be a second one. So you always, I don't know, for some reason reading about how grateful people are that the First World War ended, and that they don't know that there's another one coming, right? But then, of course, the influenza outbreak of 1918. Fun fact about that, it's often called the Spanish flu, and it's not because that's where it started. It was called the Spanish flu because Spain was neutral, and so they were a safe nation to sort of implicate. And then, of course, in America here, we had the stock market crash and the Great Depression. So that's kind of setting the time frame for where we are.
Also, the influenza killed more people than World War I, and mostly young people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also interesting. It almost ended the war sooner than it ended.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, because they just ran out of young men to send off.
Yeah.
If you're interested in a topic, which I find very fascinating, I can highly recommend the book The Pale Rider by Laura Spinney. It's really good. It's really interesting.
Oh, nice. I haven't read that one yet, but I have read a different one, so I'm going to add that to my list. Yeah, it's really fascinating. And so, anyway. Things have been tough, and one of the things that had come out of President Roosevelt's second New Deal was something called the WPA, or the Works Progress Administration. This project employed millions of job seekers, many of whom were unskilled workers, to carry out public works projects, including the construction of public buildings like schools, housing, and then, of course, infrastructure like airports, bridges, and roads. So it's Monday, October 5th, 1936, and a group of WPA workers are taking a lunch break near East Boston Airport, which is now, of course, known as Logan Airport, Logan International Airport at that. Our airport is on the water, which, I'm not going to lie, it's not my favorite when landing sometimes, but it's fine. Did that ever bother you when you were working as a flight attendant, the
No, and I have been to like small creek islands where you really land on a runway that leads into the water.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty cool.
Okay. I'm always like, it's when you feel the break. Well, yes, obviously, I don't have to asking the former flight attendant, that thing when you can feel the plane breaking because they've put the flaps up and they're like reversing something and all of that's happening and you're just hoping, slow down, slow down, slow down. Because, if it doesn't, you'd probably be fine that you just sort of right into the harbor. I don't know. Anyway, so these guys, they're enjoying their lunch. And I did look this up just out of curiosity because there weren't a lot of holes to dive down. So I had to find my own. And it seems that baked bean sandwiches were one of the most common packed meals after the Depression. And of course, some of you may know that Boston is known for baked beans. So yeah, it's a safe assumption someone was eating a baked bean sandwich, which I don't know. I mean, I grew up eating sloppy joes. It just seems like a hard, messy thing to eat, right? But they were often distributed in food pantries and they were a really affordable source of protein. So it seemed like baked bean sandwiches on white bread with a thermos of coffee was sort of the norm. Also, I know baked beans are common in the UK and in other places, and Boston baked beans use molasses and salt pork in their recipe, which is, I guess, what differentiates them. And it made us famous enough to be known as Beantown, which people still refer to Boston as. Someone listening probably loves baked bean sandwiches, and I'm not judging. So they're out there, they're enjoying their lunch, and oh, hey, what's that? They notice something floating in the water. Some sort of bundle wrapped in burlap. And one of the men, as men are so wont to do, right, gets a stick and pokes it. And when this happens, the burlap sort of falls away, and it reveals a leg.
Yeah. You don't want that on your lunch break or on your morning walks with your dog.
Indeed, you do not. And so they notify the authorities, and the police arrive, and they confirm that, yep, that's a leg. Some sources say still wearing a stocking, but I'm not sure if that was just to be, I don't know if that's true or if that was, like, added to make it more scintillating.
Extra shock value.
Yeah. So the police set out in their boats, a lot of rowboats, and they're looking around in the harbor to see if they can find any more sinister burlap. And later that afternoon, another burlap sack is found near Governor's Island, about a mile away from where the first leg was found. And it's another leg. And so the police send both legs to Dr. William J. Brickley, who is a very talented young medical examiner for the city of Boston. A more extensive search took place, and they found what looked like a bloodied sheet, some bloody fabric, a pair of surgical gloves, which were found a few miles away from each other, but seemed to be a match, a pinky peach-colored women's slip, a woman's belt, but no more body parts. So, fortunately, what they had found, well, in terms of body parts, had been sent to Dr. Brickley, who was very, very good at his job. So now we're going to talk about the forensics of those legs. So they were both wrapped in burlap potato bags, and I believe I think what had happened was after they were dismembered, they were bent at the knee and then sort of tied together thigh to ankle and then wrapped up. Does that make sense?
Unfortunately, yeah, it does.
Yeah, okay. And so one of them was only wrapped in a burlap sack, but the other one was wrapped in a green window curtain, and then another layer was the burlap potato sack. Initially, everyone, well, at least police and reporters, assumed that this surely must have been an abortion gone wrong. So let that sink in for a moment. That came up in your very excellent, well done episode last week about Dorothy Arnold. And this is roughly the same time period. Our victims were born the same year. And listen, we're not going to get into any kind of pro-choice, anti-choice debate here, but make no mistake, it's a fact. And anyone who has studied history or true crime knows that when abortion is illegal, abortions don't stop, women just die more often.
Yeah.
It is what it is. That is a fact.
Yeah.
And so...
That's true.
Yep. And to quote page 1, so this is page 1 of the evening edition of the Boston Globe on October 6, 1936. This is part of a larger article. Quote, medical examination. The police leaned heavily on the assistance of medical examiner William J. Brickley to help them solve the mystery. Their efforts to formulate a theory to explain the case received a shock today when the medical examiner reported that he had found nothing in his examination of the 2 legs turned over to him to show that the dead woman had been in a condition requiring an illegal operation. Past experience of police officers in cases where dismembered bodies played a leading role had led them to suspect illegal surgery every time they found a sawed-off limb of a woman. End quote. But our Dr. Brickley would not confirm this, and he just did a very thorough job examining the legs that were sent to him.
Okay, wait. Sorry for interrupting.
No, please, I need a drink.
I might sound super ignorant now, but how can Dr. Brickley make this assessment, abortion or non-abortion, just by examining legs? Like, how?
Right. I think he couldn't, and that was his point. So I think at that time when abortions went wrong, as they very often did, bodies were cut up to hide the fact that an illegal medical procedure had been done so that it wouldn't lead back to anybody, right? So anytime body parts showed up, the police, the press, they were like, oh, see, someone went for an abortion, and now look, here they are in pieces. That's kind of the tone of all of the initial reports and other ones that we've seen from this time period, right? This one included. And I think, I'm putting words in his mouth, but I truly think that Dr. Brickley was just like, hang on a minute, nothing about these legs indicates an abortion gone wrong. I don't think he was so much saying it couldn't have happened, more just saying, all I have are legs, so stop saying this person whose identity we don't know died of an illegal abortion. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, got it, yeah.
I think police and press would have really liked, especially the police, would have been very happy to have a doctor confirm.
Yeah, because then they would have been like, it's your own fault.
As long as you, exactly. As long as you don't have an abortion, this won't happen to you. And not that, oh, look, someone's out there dismembering women.
Yeah, it's again very victim blamey.
Right? Yeah. But he was a really good doctor. And he didn't tell anybody what they wanted to hear. He just stuck with the facts. You know what I mean? So bravo, Dr. Brickley, for being ahead of his time. Because I think a lot of doctors back then may have just said, oh, yeah, probably. So what Dr. Brickley did, he had x-rays taken to examine the bone density, and these scans showed that she was fully grown but not yet showing any signs of osteoporosis, and he was able to ascertain that the victim was about 5'2" or 152.4 centimeters tall, and that she was likely between the ages of 25 and 40. His very thorough examination of her legs led him to believe that she was a brunette, and her feet were particularly interesting because of the placement of calluses on them led him to be pretty sure that this woman usually wore high heels and was fond of dancing. It's kind of amazing when you read these sorts of things, but yeah, like real-life CSI, but in the 1930s. And very interestingly, she had a size 3 shoe size, which is...
What?
It's tiny, right? So I looked this up. It's tiny. Teeny tiny feet. I looked it up. And in a June 2020 article for bootmoodfoot.com, Steve Thompson writes, quote, during the early years of the 20th century, the average shoe size for women, now this is American shoe sizes we're talking about, quote, during the early years of the 20th century, the average shoe size for women was between 3.5 to 4. From the 40s to the 60s, the number increased to 5.5 until the 70s, where it changed to a 7.5, end quote. Today, the average woman in the United States wears a size between an 8.5 and a 9. This is because women are taller on average than they used to be, right? We keep getting taller and taller and taller. But even then, a 3 was small, like very small. And so this information is published in the newspaper. Isabel Murphy is living in Allston, and which is part of the greater Boston area. And when she reads the newspaper that day, she immediately picks up the phone and she calls one of her best friends, Grayce Asquith. And when she gets no response at either her Boston or her Weymouth residences, again, she'd been trying to reach her for a few weeks with no luck. She phones the police. And yes, everyone in the UK, Boston and Weymouth, Massachusetts. They're named after towns in the UK. So we know. I know. Yours was first. So Grayce used to model, especially shoes, and she was known for her teeny tiny feet and for her love of dancing and partying. And in fact, she enjoyed a party so much, she had become known as, quote, the Merry Widow of Weymouth, end quote. So we don't know an awful lot about the early life of Grayce May Griffin. She was born in Massachusetts in April of 1895. And from what I've been able to find, it seems her father worked at a shoe factory in Lynn, Massachusetts, and he died by suicide in June of 1906 when she had just turned 11. And I really tried to find out some more information on her and her family. I think her mother might have been a nurse, but Griffin is a common name, and so doing the ancestry records was a little bit tough. So in the initial census records I found of her name was spelled Grace, Grace, but she would be known as Grace, Grayce. So I think she may have added that when she did some modeling. She posed for, I think they called it like pretty girl pictures, I think like catalogs and things like that. And also she was, of course, a shoe model. Grayce married a widowed dairy farmer from Wellesley, living in Wellesley, not from Wellesley, I should say, and his name was Godfrey Asquith. He had actually met his first wife in France while serving in the First World War. They had married in 1919. He brought her back over with him from France, and she died in 1923. Her name was Laura, but I couldn't find a cause of death. My guess, well, top of the list would be childbirth, right? Godfrey seems to have been born in Pennsylvania. I'm 99% sure that Asquith was changed from something else that it just sounded like, and his parents were, immigrants, and he was first-generation American. After the war, he's a dairy farmer in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which is nice. So to this day, if you're single and a friend's like, hey, I know someone, they're a dairy farmer in Wellesley, you're interested. This is good. Good stuff.
Why? I mean, what makes a dairy farmer from Wellesley so desirable and different from any other dairy farmer?
Well, Wellesley is a very expensive town to live in. It's just a little bit west of Boston, but not too far. It's near Wayland. But you'd be wealthy to own land there, and they like cows. So I'm in. Like, what's not to like?
I mean, it depends if it's a, conventional dairy farmer nowadays.
Well, yes, back then it definitely was. I actually did find one ad for his dairy. I'll share that in the Facebook group, but just a little ad. Okay, back to Godfrey. So a year after he loses his first wife, he remarries a pretty young woman, our shoe model, our Grace. And they were, we hope, happy for 3 years until Godfrey died in 1927. And when he passed away, he left her a sizable life insurance policy. I couldn't find anything on what happened with him, but again, at that time period, he got a bad splinter. Anything.
Yeah. The cows kicked him.
Yeah, he was kicked by a cow. He drank some bad milk. I mean, really, we could speculate forever. So after she was widowed, she moved to 1377 Com Ave in Allston, just in case any of our listeners are like, oh my God, that's my building. It's possible. So that's where she moved to, which was a lot closer to Boston with her mother. And she lived there, still modeling shoes, and I think taking care of her now sort of ailing mother until her mother passed away about 3 years after she lost her husband. I think she was now alone in the world. No siblings, no children. Her father had poisoned himself when she was 11. She was a young widow, and then her mother died all before the age of 40. That's part of the reason I wanted to tell her story. It's just like, wow, she went through so much, and she kept going. She still manages to find happiness when she could, and she really did, kind of seize life and seize the happy times and enjoyed herself.
That's a lot of loss and grief. All before 40. I'm happy she managed to find a little bit of happiness at least.
I know, me too. It's so important. And now we're going to talk about her horrific murder. Well, that's what we're here for. Obviously, I'm not laughing at her murder, just life in general and the unfairness of it. So after her mother dies, she buys herself a second home, which is a cottage on Whitman's Pond in East Weymouth, Massachusetts. I think there was a resort there through the 30s, and it was already a very well-established town, well-populated. The second oldest in Massachusetts, I think. Abigail Adams, First Lady, was born there, and Booker T. Washington had a little cottage there in the early 1900s, like 1902, maybe 1903. It's not out in the middle of nowhere. It's a well-known destination. And she has this little cottage by the pond, and it's here that she's known for her parties. She loved music and dancing, and of course, Prohibition had been repealed in 1933. I'm not saying she was a big drinker or anything, but it helps if you're dancing in heels. I'm just gonna leave that out there. And it helps to keep things in context, right? So Grayce loved to dance. Her parties were so notorious that her neighbors called the police on her at least thrice because of noise complaints. And it's the police, I believe, that coined the nickname the Merry Widow of Weymouth because of this, right? It's like that, the Merry Widow's having another party. So good for her.
It's catchy.
It is. And I think it's nice to be thought of as a Merry Widow. I think only because a lot of the time, as a widow, very often when you read the Merry Widow, it's because they killed their spouse, right? It's a story where they're happy because they're a murderer. And this is not the case here. This is really the case of somebody who just tried to find happiness. Isabel Murphy, she's worried that these legs belong to her friend Grayce, who she has not been able to get in touch with. And the police head to her cottage to see if they can find her. And when they arrive inside the charming little cottage, they find a bloodbath. It seems perhaps dinner was being prepared or had maybe just been served. I read in one report that a meal of corned beef and cabbage wasn't fully cooked and had been left on the stove with the heat turned off. I hope that wasn't the case because the timing for this would have been weeks and that would have been deeply unpleasant.
Yeah, but no matter what the meal was, it's
the least of the problems. It really is. Yeah. So everything they find indicates a meal had been planned for 3. There's 3 places set at the table, 3 glasses with liquid in them, and fingerprints on the glasses of Grayce. Well, we'll get into that in a minute. The blood evidence led the authorities to believe that Grayce had been hit in the head, but then tried to make it to the bedroom to lock her door, but she was too dazed, so she was caught and then dragged out and murdered.
This reminds me a lot of Smutty Nose.
Yes. So much of Smutty Nose. It's awful. It was absolute overkill. She was bludgeoned, and then also she was cut with what they believe was a meat cleaver. She was dragged to the bathroom where she was placed inside a clawfoot tub and dismembered. There was blood in the tub and tissue clogging the drains. There was a footprint in blood under the tub that somebody had hastily tried to mop up, but they hadn't done a great job and they'd sort of missed it. And so investigators were able to get a toe print in blood, but they didn't know who the suspects might be. So looking into her life, they learned that Grayce had a fiancé, a very nice man named John Lyons, who was a naval veteran who had been disabled in the First World War. I tried to find more information about him, and again, really hard time trying to find out much information, which only just makes me a little bit sad because I feel like in this story, he reminds me of Ron Goldman, kind of, in this scenario.
Okay, so he was murdered as well, if you mention Ron Goldman.
Yeah, I think he was, but you tell me what you think when I'm done telling you what we know. Yeah. So when they went looking for John Lyons, they learned from his landlord that he had been picked up by Oscar Bartolini, who was Grayce's handyman. And the fingerprints on the glasses at the house belonged to Grayce, Oscar, and John. So the 3 of them were having a meal. Grayce's lawyers then went to police to report that she had told him on 2 occasions that Oscar Bartolini had raped her. The lawyer said that she had been visibly beaten on one of those instances, but that she had ultimately decided not to press charges.
Wait, what? The handyman had raped her?
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit odd then that she would keep employing him if he attacked her like that. Not doubting any of this, just... I'm just trying to wrap my mind around the situation here.
No, I agree. And I spent a lot of nights thinking about that. So I will say there's a lot of talk about her being promiscuous. And they talk about how, they found, and it's so, again, it's one of these things where they keep trying to blame her for what happened to her over, first they find legs and it's like, it must have been an abortion. Like yeah. And then it's like, they find an address book and they're like, this must be her little black book of gentleman callers. Do you know what I mean? And then it was like, oh no, it's just an address book. And so there's all this talk. Even the prosecutor, I read the trial transcript, and even the prosecutor says something, I'm very much paraphrasing here, but he says something like, I don't like her morals, but it doesn't excuse murder. And it's like, her morals? Like, what was she? Come on, people. All her friends insisted she just enjoyed partying, but was no way promiscuous. We don't care either way. I don't care if it was
even
a little
if she
black
was.
book. Right, exactly. And so I did lie in bed thinking about this kind of a lot. Like, why? Why didn't she fire this man? This is what I came up with. I'm not sure that I actually have enough fingers to count the women I know who have been sexually assaulted or raped and who have not reported it. Because in my lifetime, they were told by authorities that they would be blamed, that no one would believe them, they'd be put through hell, and it wouldn't have been worth it. I can't imagine that it would have been better in the 1930s. As to why she didn't fire him, and not only to not fire him, but to still have him for dinner, the only thing I can think of, and it breaks my fucking heart, is the idea that she thought she was probably to blame too. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, it's possible.
Yeah,
yes.
Definitely possible. Definitely. Well, I mean, look at what we're looking at right now is it's still an issue today, right? If, say, somebody's too intoxicated to give consent, right?
The sad thing is that back then nobody would have considered that rape if she was too intoxicated too.
That's what I'm saying. So even though she had been beaten up fighting back, yeah. So that's why it's like, it just makes me really sad. Do you know what I mean? That
it's incredible that I'm just trying to figure. I just can't figure it out. I have to think about it a little bit more, you know? I'm just hit with this information.
I know.
And I'm like, what?
I know. And it's a lot. It's a lot to take in. I know more than one person who was sort of taken advantage of and raped while they were in a state where they couldn't consent or not, so raped, who were still friends and in the same social circle with their rapist for a very long time. Yeah. So I personally think that's probably what happened, but I don't know. I mean, there's no way to know. So let's talk about the rest of the overwhelming evidence against Bartolini.
So there's more than the rape.
Yeah, other than the rapes.
Okay.
So the bloody toe print, it was a match to him. It was the first time a toe print was used in a trial. This was done by chemist Joseph T. Walker. Here's a little bit of relevant crime trivia for you. So this is from an article written by his son, Thomas W. Walker, for Harvard Magazine. He writes, quote, in 1934, chemist Joseph T. Walker, Ph.D., class of 33, took on the task of creating a crime detection laboratory for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Using science in crime detection wasn't new. Arthur Conan Doyle had envisioned it in his Sherlock Holmes mysteries, and excellent work had begun in New York City in the 1920s. But applying such skills statewide was. Yet from his first tiny lab at the State House, the 26-year-old redhead, as one newspaper reporter dubbed him, immediately and confidently expounded on what such a facility, if properly equipped, he needed a spectrograph, could do. End quote. So our state has him to thank for our first forensics labs, and I'll link to the article. It's a quick but very delightful read. And in this case, Dr. Walker matched the bloody toe print to Bartolini, and this is the first time that was ever done. He also matched the blood type in the bath to Grace's blood type. Witnesses saw Bartolini deliver wood to Grace's home wrapped in burlap sacks the day before the murder. And when they searched Bartolini's home, they found the same burlap sacks there, as well as string that matched what Grace's legs were tied with, and also a bloody seat cushion. His fingerprints were also on a glass and other items at the scene. There was a cleaver, knife, and saw at the cottage that had all been wiped down. There were no fingerprints on them. It says they were cleaned but badly or hastily. So I'm assuming like not blood soaked, but also... and no fingerprints, but had clearly been involved.
Mean.
Okay.
Wipe down once, but don't do it properly.
It was a quick cleanup. So Bartolini was arrested, And he said that on September 19th, he'd picked up Lyons to bring him to Grace's for dinner, and they'd all eaten. And he left when Grace and her fiancé started to get kissy-kissy, and he hadn't seen them since.
Okay, first of all, I thought the dinner wasn't even ready yet.
Yeah,
so
I don't know.
Could be a lie, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't buy what he's saying.
No.
But I keep an open mind until I know more.
Yes. So, on October 24th, Grace's head is found. This is a quote from the St. Albans, Vermont Daily Messenger, dated October 24th, 1936, page 1. Quote, Boston. Investigation into the death of Mrs. Grayce Asquith quickened today with the discovery of her head in Boston Harbor. The head, found 18 days after the former photographer's model's legs were discovered in the harbor, was identified by 2 dentists. Both Benjamin Daniels of Boston and Dr. William Tracy of Weymouth identified dental work as theirs. This is where there's a lot to unpack in this article. Continuing. Earlier, Mrs. Isabel Murphy of Boston, a friend to Mrs. Asquith, who first reported her missing to police, tentatively identified the head.
What?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So her head before it went into the water was beaten almost beyond recognition. And then it's been in the water for weeks. And they already have dentists, not one, but 2 fucking dentists to confirm dental work. And they still have her best friend come and look at her mangled.
That's not traumatizing at all.
Right?
Like, at all.
Who are these people?
Wow.
Is this why people older people constantly think we're a bunch of softies? Because we're people just constantly having bodies of strangers in various stages of decomp, brought into their homes, or being asked to ID horrifically disfigured and decomposing loved ones whose bodies had been in water?
You don't even have to go that far back. Remember Los Alfaques?
Yes. And I keep thinking of that poor boy in the Jersey Maneater and Josie Langmaid and what? Ugh. And I'm not even going to get into every injury on her skull alone because there's almost too many and it feels exploitative, but it was overkill with blunt and sharp objects. And I would frankly be shocked if anything other than dental records would have been able to identify her. So it just, I don't know. It bothers me that they had her friend in to tentatively identify her. It's just...
Can you even?
No.
Can you even if somebody's bludgeoned to death, unrecognizable, and then the head was in the water for weeks?
Yeah.
What did they expect would happen?
I really don't. Yeah. So the article continues. There's more here. Quote, still sought was the woman's torso and John A. Lyons, missing admirer of the 40-year-old Weymouth widow. Everything else I read seems to indicate that they were engaged. It doesn't really matter either way. Continuing on. Police theorized that Lyons, one of the last they believed to see Mrs. Asquith alive, was slain too. Medical examiner William J. Brickley said the head bore a deep fracture of the skull, but he declined to say exactly what caused her death. A policeman on board a police boat, which was patrolling a section of the harbor where an automobile and its driver sank early yesterday, found the head. From the section of the channel, a driver brought up a piece of green curtain and a string. End quote. So they don't say if they found the man or the car that they were looking for when they found the head. There was a lot going on that day, it seems like. There was also another man that was pulled from the water that day, and briefly everybody was like, they thought they had found John Lyons, but it wasn't John Lyons. And no one has ever found John Lyons. His landlady agreed with Bartolini that Bartolini had picked him up on September 19th, but she said he then never returned, not even to receive his, military pension disability checks. Bartolini's defense claimed that Lyons had killed Grace, took off, and Bartolini, scared that he would be blamed, disposed of the body.
Oh, please. I'm so much rolling my eyes.
Yeah, it doesn't seem likely, does it? And a lot of the Italian community was backing Bartolini. There was a very sincerely, legitimately very problematic issue with anti-Italian hate crime and xenophobia at that time.
Yes, I know. And we also discussed this already in the X-Men of New Orleans. But still, there's so much.
Yeah. And it's... At this time, it really was a serious problem. And it wasn't a far-fetched thing for the Italian community to be worried that he was being railroaded just because he was Italian. But in this case, I really do think he was a violent sociopath who just happened to be also an Italian immigrant. I think just the fact that Lyons was never found and his money was never touched again.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what happened is Oscar disabled John first. Although John is always described as being disabled, I don't know how disabled he was. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we don't know. It could be from a limp.
Yeah. Yeah,
to
exactly. To missing... Yeah, I don't know.
Legs and arms. Yeah,
exactly.
I know what you mean.
We don't know. But I think what happened is that he disabled John, killed John very quickly, and then chased Grayce down. There was blood spatter, blood all over the house. They dug up the basement. They dug up all around in the area, searched the woods, dug around the foundations of her house. They never found her torso or any part of John Lyons.
Do they think there was a fight going on before?
No. I think it was a sneak attack. I think it was a suddenly, yeah.
It was not like it didn't look like they were sitting down having dinner and then a fight ensued. Like, for example, Bartolini said, well, she slept with me, for example. And then she goes like, well, he raped me. And then everything,
Well, I do wonder whether that might have been part of what had happened or whether it was jealousy on behalf of Bartolini, who thought that Grayce should be his if he had an unhealthy... It seems like they were the three of them, from what I read. I think the three of them were sitting at the table together, drinking, at least, if not eating, when my guess is that Bartolini came from behind and hit them in the back of the head, each of them, with something to knock them out. But Grayce was able to make a run for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but he also, you said there was an overkill, so there was a lot of anger and hate.
Yes, directed at her. Yes,
victim.
Absolutely. Absolutely. At the trial, this is what they more or less say they believe happened, and they believe that Bartolini took Lyons' body, killed Lyons, killed Grayce, then took Lyons' body and dumped him somewhere in the harbor or in the ocean. Somewhere. Or he could have been buried somewhere. I think at trial they said they thought that he was dumped in the ocean. The pond at Grace's home, where her little cottage was, that had already been searched many times with no luck. And so they thought that he had gotten rid of Lyons' body and then returned to Grace's house, and then taken his time dismembering her. He also had worked as a chef. I don't know if he would have been doing any of it's really hard because there's just not that much information about it. So some articles you'll see it's like, well, so-and-so, testified that they had witnessed him, cutting apart a chicken. So he knew how to take apart body parts. Do you know what I mean? And they do think that one of the primary weapons was a meat cleaver, which he certainly would have known how to use. But I don't think we had enough dismembered body parts to say for sure. Whether it was somebody with expert experience, but I think, yeah. And everybody else thinks that he was also guilty because he was convicted and he was sentenced to death. Now, once in jail, Oscar Bartolini, he didn't take things very well. And so at some point, he apparently climbed to the highest point, climbed up the bars to the highest point in the jail. And then was like, goodbye, everyone, goodbye. It was very dramatic, goodbye, cruel, and he flung himself to the concrete below.
I'm sorry that I'm laughing.
No, he broke his clavicle and his arm in a few places, but was still healthy enough to be executed. But the governor at the time, he was not 100% sure that Bartolini was guilty because Lyons couldn't be found. And at the time, he felt until we find Lyons, we can't really be sure. And so he commuted his sentence to life in prison with an arm that's just going to hurt forever. Every time the weather fucking changes, it's going to, that clavicle, you're going to regret that jump, buddy. But he was released in 1961 and deported to Italy. Yeah, I don't know. This is a quote from the New England Historical Society. Quote, In 1961, 25 years after the murder, Foster Carlo, Massachusetts' first Italian-American governor, pardoned Bartolini. Bartolini's longtime supporters believed he had only helped remove and dismember Grayce's body because he was afraid of the real killer, Lyons. For his part, Lyons was never heard from again, leaving open the question, was he an accomplice in the murder or a second undiscovered victim? End quote. So, what do you think?
It's tough. It's tough. I don't want to judge people too quickly, especially there's not so much information, so I don't want to jump to conclusion.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that Bartolini did it. First of all, if the rape part was true and not just a rumor put into place by the lawyers.
Right.
He did have violent tendencies, then he was definitely there because of the toe print.
Mm-hmm. And his fingerprints on the glass.
Yeah, the fingerprints, the way that the legs were tied up with whatever he brought before, the days before, and the burlap and so on. Of course, it could have been that Lyons did it and then, disappeared. But how did he disappear? Never to be seen again. He must have started a new life then, right? I mean, that's implied.
Well, he must have. And if he had to get picked up by Bartolini, how did he disappear?
Exactly. And he was on disability, so I don't think he had a lot of wealth,
Right.
How did he do all of that? Did money and or valuables, was there something missing?
No, nothing was ever, and they never mentioned anything being stolen.
Yeah, and I think they would have known if there's a certain amount missing where you think somebody could start a new life. I just wish there would be a clear motive, other than somebody being maybe a violent sociopath.
I think possibly the motive was that Bartolini was afraid Grayce was going to report what he had done. I think that might have been the motive.
Yeah, but it's the 1930s.
I know. Or just the jealousy. If he had raped her not once but twice.
I think that's a more believable for me, at least.
Yeah.
I just think if he raped her twice.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time passed between her telling the lawyers and the raping. But I don't know. I think if a woman in the 30s goes to the authorities like days or weeks later and then she says he's still my handyman or he did it twice or he came over to dinner, it's just, I don't think anybody would have believed her, unfortunately. So I don't think he would be, I don't think that was a worry that a rapist would have to have.
Right. I don't know. What I couldn't find out is when the rapes were alleged to have happened. So they could have happened the previous week. That we don't know. And yeah,
it's frustrating. It's a bit of a frustrating case, right?
Yeah. I could see a woman, the only person who said that Grayce had been raped was her attorney. And I can absolutely see at that time a woman pretty much on her own. Well, really, she had no family. She had friends, but no family. And she would have had, and she had an attorney, she had a handyman, whatever. But yeah, I could see you would go to your attorney, talk about what happened, and then probably the attorney said, no one will believe you. Don't bother, because that still happens today.
But that's what I mean. That's why I don't think that Bartolini was too scared. I think jealousy or a fight.
An unhealthy obsession.
An obsession, something like that. Maybe if he raped her, maybe he thought like she led him on or she wanted it. And then they are there having dinner and he just makes some disgusting remarks.
Well, and also he wouldn't be the first man who thought that because a woman was nice to him, she was interested in him.
Exactly. I mean, we don't even have to go there because we could do a whole episode about that.
And that's a horrible thing. Not in a dangerous way, but just in a general, like as somebody who was generally just nice to everybody. When I was younger, occasionally people would think I had crushes on them when I didn't. I'm just nice. But it's possible. It's very possible that she was just nice and he interpreted it in a different way. I don't know. It bothers me that John Lyons was never found and that if he has living family, they never got any justice. You know what I mean? And you see why I feel like he's sort of the Ron Goldman of the story.
He's forgotten.
Yeah. It's
just like a side note.
Yeah. And not only that, but at least it's sort of like did he do it? I think he was another victim. I really do. This case was really hard. It was really hard to find information on the people involved. Find a Grave had nothing. Even doing like the genealogy stuff, it was tough. Yeah, it's just a really sad case and kind of interesting. The first toe print used in a criminal trial. I've just never heard it before. So, yeah, that is the story of the murder of Grayce Asquith and the disappearance of John Lyons.
It's sad. It's sad and frustrating.
It is, right? I do think Bartolini did it, though. I do think it was a jealous somehow.
I can see it, yeah.
Because who else?
Yeah. It just makes sense. It's not just the rape. It's not just the toe print. It's not just the burlap. It's all together.
That's it.
You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
Like just... Plus, he admitted to dismembering her. So, I mean, who dismembers somebody?
And that's weird, too, right? Because the first thing was, no, I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, I left because they started kissing.
Yeah, I left because they started kissing.
Which I don't even buy. I see him as this kind of guy who would linger if somebody starts making out. You know what I mean?
Well,
like...
what I could also see very clearly happening would be almost like they're enjoying dinner. She gets drinks for people. She gives him a quick kiss as she hands him his drink. And he just decides then and there that what just happened, this is my woman. And that's it, you know. I don't think he was the most stable person. Yeah, and that's it. So, yeah.
Thank you. That was, as I said, interesting but sad. And
sad, right?
Somehow.
Yeah. So, something good. How are you? I've missed you.
I missed you too. My something good is that I'm starting to feel better and stronger by the day.
Good.
I even worked a little bit in the garden today.
Don't you overdo it.
I'm still exhausted easily and But my husband is home for 12 days of vacation and we're doing a little bit around the house. Well, he's doing most things around the house. And in the evening we're binge watching The Crown and we're just simply enjoying each other's company. And that's my something good for this week. And I'm sorry I forgot the something good last week. I was way out of my element apparently and my brain was kind of foggy.
You know what? Our something good last week is that we kept going. Like we're both still here.
Yeah. Yes.
Sometimes things just, especially when you're sick and on top of, there's just a lot. I'm still, because of COVID, like it's been a year since my mom's passed and we still haven't had her funeral. So I'm still trying to get that. There's just a lot happening and my physical health is in the garbage. So my something good, none of that's good. This is what's good. I've just rented a house for a week in Florida. It's not for a while yet. We're waiting until everybody is fully vaccinated and then the 2 weeks past that. And then we're driving down with Opus so he can meet my in-laws, Paul's parents and brother, who he hasn't seen his family in over a year. And I haven't seen them in over 2 years. He went down and that was just by luck because I had a major surgery in January of 2020 and I was recovering a lot better than I thought I was. And Paul had taken time off to take care of me and I was like, go see your parents, because that's usually when we go down. Like I can't fly, but you go. So I'm so glad that he did. But now he hasn't seen his parents in over a year. I haven't seen them in 2 years and it's going to be our first vacation since Aruba. So Dad and Moose are coming and some other close family. So we're not really going to do anything. We're just going to spend some time in a rental house, I think. Yeah, we're all overdue. And I know everybody listening is like, yes, I can't wait until I can see. We've all got people, right, that were, my UK family, my Spain family. It's just like, I miss everybody so much. But we'll get there. Just keep going, right? All right.
Please, if you have 5 seconds and you like our show, please go to iTunes if you're listening on iTunes or have an iTunes account and leave us a rating or review. It really helps us out. It helps other people find us. What else? Patreon. If you're interested in our Patreon, go to patreon.com and search for Fresh Hell Podcast or go to our webpage, www.freshhellpodcast.com. There you find links to our Patreon, to our merch store, to our PO box, to our email, to our Facebook group.
Yes. Patreon members, our murder tier, we've got a game night coming up, right? This Friday?
Yes, next week, right? Saturday.
That's right. What's the date? Saturday the 20th.
This week, Saturday. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Saturday the 26th? It's on the thing. So go take a look because we have a game night coming up. So for our murder tier patrons. Facebook group. Yes. Please come say hello in our wonderful Facebook group. Just search Fresh Hell Podcast Murder, and you will find...
That's important.
Yeah. There's also a Fresh Hell group for parenting, so If you're looking for crime scene photos, you want to make sure you type in that murder after fresh hell, and you will find us. Please say hi to your pets.
Yes, hug them, kiss them, cuddle them, give them treats. Always, always treat them as good as possible.
Yes.
Tell them we love them. Tell them we miss them.
And if you, like us, have been going through some shit lately, if you're going through hell,
keep going. Tschüss.
bye.